Welcome to Treon's Realm. Today we're going to take a look at the physical version of Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 for the Nintendo Switch. Now I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Metal Gear Master Collection may be one of the worst physical Switch releases of all time. This almost feels like Konami went out of its way to spit in the face of physical Switch collectors. Now when it comes to the games themselves, the presentation and emulation is pretty basic with no real option to change things to suit your personal tastes. Sadly, this means that the PS1 Metal Gear Solid is pretty blurry, which I'm assuming was done to emulate the CRT effect, but it isn't ideal and makes the game look pretty rough. On top of that, the fact that Konami didn't include the full-on GameCube remake is pretty inexcusable at this point. I'm sure it's tied to licensing since it was co-developed with Nintendo, but its exclusion from the Switch version in particular is ridiculous at this point. As for the PS1 game, as I said, it's looking pretty rough. There are better ways to play this, unfortunately. When it comes to Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, they're literally just bare-bone ports of the PS3 and 360 HD versions that were released over a decade ago, which are superior to this game since they're actually on disc and don't require a massive installation. The inclusion of the original Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake from the MSX, as well as the two NES Metal Gear games, is nice, but it feels like a bit of an afterthought. It should be noted that without any kind of patch on the cartridge, these 4 games are the only ones playable directly from the cart. People have already run into some issues across all versions, and Konami is planning to fix them, meaning that the patch sizes may change, but I'm going with what I found during my current testing. Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2 are both at version 1.1.0, while Metal Gear Solid 3, the original MSX Metal Gear games, and the bonus content, which includes Metal Gear and Snake's Revenge for the NES, are all at version 1.1.1. This is kind of moot though, since all 3 Metal Gear Solid games require a base level patch that brings everything up to version 1.2.1 in order to even be playable. When you put the cart into the Switch, you will get 5 icons that breaks up the collection into smaller parts so you can download the games individually. The unpatched cart only gives you access to the master books for each game and requires the base patch for everything else. Yes, that means that you can't play anything from Metal Gear Solid, Sons of Liberty, or Snake Eater unless you download the required base patch. You literally only have access to a glorified PDF file for each game that covers the story and characters of the games. You don't even get access to the screenplay book, which is the other glorified PDF. Another big issue that I ran into is that the game has a form of online DRM in that certain downloads require a Nintendo eShop account to access them. This is pretty horrible when it comes to the future when we have already experienced online storefronts like the eShop getting shut down, cutting off access to game content that isn't even online centered. Now I'm going to attempt to break down everything here, but there's a lot to go through. When it comes to Metal Gear Solid, the base patch comes in at 2.1 gigabytes. This will cover you for Metal Gear Solid, the VR missions, and the screenplay book. The eShop account is required in order to gain access to the special missions and Integral, which are the overseas versions of the games. Now with the additional eShop content, fully patched the game clocks in at 12.2 gigabytes. Next up is Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. The base patch for this game is 6.5 gigabytes, and that's for the game itself as well as the screenplay book. Now, if you want the Japanese voiceover pack, again, you'll need the eShop account, and that takes it up to 12 gigabytes. Now, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, the base patch for this game is 10.3 gigabytes, and it gives you Snake Eater, both the North American and European versions, as well as a screenplay book. If you want to patch it up with the Japanese voice pack, which requires the eShop account, it's going to clock in at 17.5 gigabytes. Now, as for Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, both of these games are on the cart already. So that includes the 2 games as well as the master book. The patch is required to access the screenplay book, and that comes in at 210 megabytes. And now we have the last one, which is the Volume 1 bonus content. Now on the cart, we've got Metal Gear and Snake's Revenge for the NES, as well as a digital soundtrack that features 20 tracks of music from the series. Now there is a patch for that one that comes in at 200 megabytes. Now, if you want to get to the English versions of the digital graphic novels for Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2, they're going to come in total between the two of them. It'll be 12.2 gigabytes, but you can download those individually if you want. The graphic novel for MGS1 is 5 gigabytes and MGS2 is 7 gigabytes. And that's actually the same for the overseas version. So if you add those in, it'll total up between everything to 24.3 gigabytes. These are video files, which explains their larger size. When downloading all the base patches required for the cartridge, which includes every game, it requires 19.31 gigabytes. Now, if you patch in the stuff covering the English language content, this adds the digital graphic novel videos. The total comes in at 31.31 gigabytes, which seems to be where the 32 gigabyte requirement on the back of the box comes from. Now, just because I wanted to cover everything, I went ahead and also downloaded everything possible for this collection, including all language options, and it clocked in at a whopping 66.21 gigabytes. Granted, I was taking things to the extreme on that last download, but it was exhausting seeing how this was all broken up. The cartridge itself is a mess when trying to lock down the file size and what's actually on it. This is largely because Konami has not been clear and used different numbers all over the place, and none of these numbers paint a clear picture. My best guess is that the cart has about 2 to 2.5 gigabytes of game data on it, which would mean that they should be using a 4 gigabyte cartridge. Much like Borderlands 3 though, the cart itself seems to indicate that it's at least an 8 gigabyte cart, which is downright baffling. If this is the case, that means that there was at least room to put the base Metal Gear Solid and VR missions on the cart. There could be something else going on, but without literally taking the cartridge apart and digging into the data, we'll likely never know. Honestly, this is unacceptable as a physical release, and I can't say it's much better as a digital release. The games are honestly in a pretty rough state overall. I mean, they're fine if you're looking to play them on current hardware, but there's not much else to it here. In the case of going physical when it comes to this collection, I would say that the Sony versions would be the best option if you don't already own these from a previous generation. And even then, you might even be better just playing them in those previous generation forms, such as the PS3 or the 360 versions. And in the case of the PS3, every PS3 can play PS1 games, so you can play the original Metal Gear on there that way. I would have to agree with doesitplay.org when they refer to the Switch version as physical fraud. I hate to say it, but Konami just shouldn't have even bothered in this case. I mean, if they don't want to put the work into it, why bother releasing it? I mean, I know it's all because of greed and capitalism, but this is just downright embarrassing. What do you think of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection on Switch? Are you upset with how Konami handled this collection? Let us know in the comments down below. If this video helped you and you'd like to see more, please subscribe and hit that like button. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you later.